Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. It's early Friday morning, so I think I got all the questions in this week, and there's some insane construction going on outside. I mean, I know I always say that, but it's a little crazier than usual today. So hopefully I'll try to be able to record between, hammer smashes and explosions, but I think at least some of that background noise is going to leak in today. But anyway, let's jump right in and check out the questions. I want to start with the newest question over on Patreon because it addresses something that I've been hearing quite a bit of flack about this week. The question is from Dave Kircher, aka Dirk Swizzler, the Thumbbob creator. I'm going to go through the question a bit at a time because I feel like it would probably be easier to go one step at a time. Dave said he saw a few tweets over the weekend about something called Retro Create. It's apparently in Ohio, but he's not finding any details about it and what it actually was. It seems like a creator expo, but I saw a few people in photos where I couldn't really identify what they create. And there wasn't any coverage in the convention's expo section of the Retro RGB Discord. Was it just a meetup for your friends? If so, why give it a generic name like Retro Create? I would think a ton of people feel snubbed or invalidated for not being on the invite list as a creator. So this was just a meetup. This was not a convention or an expo, which is why it wasn't in that part of the Discord. It was just a private meetup for people that essentially are people that do behind the scenes work with me and work on projects together. We called it Retro Create because if we do this next year, which I'll get to that in a bit, I didn't want Retro RGB on it for the same reasons that I've always tried to separate myself from Retro RGB. So I've never said I'm Retro RGB. I've always said I'm Bob from Retro RGB because there are plenty of people out there that hate me personally, especially if you read my Twitter account, but totally agree with the work that I've been doing for Retro RGB. So I wanted Retro Create because if this does happen next year, I don't want people to go, oh, that's that website with that fat guy that pissed me off, I'm not going. I want people to know it's never been about me, and stuff like this is about the community. So we called it that just to call it something in case there's a next year. But I think having a generic name, you're probably right in hindsight. Picking that name might have given people the impression that it was some kind of meetup or some kind of expo, but no. And in fact, the people that I invited to this, I didn't say you're not allowed to talk about it, but I said keep it on the DL and remember that just expect nothing. Expect an empty room with a bunch of people standing around drinking water or beer or something like that. Like, this is a networking meetup, and that's pretty much it. So, I understand your point about there are a few people in photos where you couldn't really identify what they create. That's another thing that I've been working very, very hard on, especially the past year. Because Retro RGB was built upon celebrating everybody in the retro gaming scene. Everybody. And there are tons of people who donate so much of their time for anything from beta testing to development, but just as a hobby. So they might not sell something, they might not, you might not see their names out there, but they're absolutely part of what goes on behind the scenes. And just a friendly reminder, I try and drop that all the time in these videos. Like, thank you for everybody who supports everything that goes on behind the scenes. And the reason I'm so vague about that is because I feel like whenever I talk about myself, like if I say something like, oh yeah, I'm part of a bunch of teams of people that are getting projects to life, and I've helped introduce people to make that happen, even just those words that fell out of my mouth, I feel like everybody's staring at me going, shut up, you fat asshole, stop trying to steal credit. Like, so I'm not good talking about myself, but this is essentially a culmination of all of that. I kind of was a little upset when I saw certain people's reactions to this. You're right. I guess some people did feel snubbed or invalidated, and it was absolutely never, ever my intention. But on the other side of things, I have always invited everybody to everything I'm at. So even if I know I'm going to be at Brooklyn Video Games tomorrow, I'll tweet out, heading over for the KOF tournament, whoever's there. And, it's, I really make everything I do part of the community. Heck, every concert I go to, I always just tweet out hey, I'm going to see In Flames, or I'm going to see Answer Infinity. Who wants to come with me and check this stuff out? So yeah, I feel really bad that some people felt that way. And, some people have the personality where they're always going to feel that way, I guess. But it was never, ever my intention. And I feel genuinely bad that people felt like that. But honestly, like I didn't even know if people were going to show up. I mean, every time I tweet out about something, even whether it's a concert or a retro gaming event, 1% of the people that say they're going to be there actually show up. And the ones that do, thank you so much, by the way. It's always awesome hanging out with you. So yeah, I figured this was something that people may or may not show up to. We'll see what happens. And then maybe we'll have another. So to skip down to the last thing you said, will there be another? Any chance it can get some kind of live stream next time? I understand that it's important to keep the guest list constrained to make sure creators can interact more. But I think a ton of the community feels like they missed out on something special and wishes they could have been a fly on the wall there. So a few things to address for that. First of all, even the small amount of people that did come almost felt too much. Like for me personally, I barely had enough time with everybody there. And maybe it was just me. Maybe I spent too much time doing interviews or something. But yeah, you're right about that. There will be, I would like there to be another. And if there is another, it's going to be something like, half of day one is the private meetup type of thing, and then all of day two is public. And I would love to open it up for people for things like maybe you're an up-and-coming creator that hasn't gotten picked up yet, so come rent a booth and show your stuff off. Or maybe you're just fans and you want to tell somebody, how their creation really made your setup better and how much you appreciate it. That's what I was doing most of the weekend anyway. But the only problem is money. And I know that people don't want to hear that. The moment I say money, people are like, oh God, what the fuck's he begging for next? But that's honestly the truth. In order to do something like this, it's got to be sponsored, and the tickets going to have to be pretty expensive because we got to get the creators to these places. We have to rent out a place in order to do it, and that is way more expensive than you could ever imagine. The difference between renting an empty room for people to stand in and having an expo style thing, you might as well add a zero to the end of that cost. So I would like there to be another. I'd like there to be different tiers. So, buy a booth, do a panel, whatever else, but, just show up and hang out. But that's time was going to tell on that one, and it really would come down to money. So I know people don't like to hear that answer, but as always, I'm just transparent. Like I can't change the fact that it costs money to do things. And the last thing you mentioned in this paragraph, I am very embarrassed about because you said any chance it could get some kind of live stream next time. I feel so dumb not thinking of that, especially because of how many people that I'm very good friends with that base their entire lives around live streaming. But the fact is that everything is clear in hindsight. So now that I hear hear people's concerns, I heard people very upset with me about this event. And now that I've heard what people had to say, I probably could have presented this as like, hey, we're doing a meetup. We're giving it a name, but it's not a thing. It's just a meetup. But hey, we'll have we'll live stream every interview that we do. And, we'll have somebody walking around live streaming, just walking around saying hi to people and stuff like that. Like that would have been really cool. And that might have made people feel a little more welcomed as part of the event. But the fact is that it's easy for me to speculate that now after it's all over with. So that's, I guess, just a screw up on my part. As far as seeing what went on there, I got a few interviews with people because seriously, why would I have people fly around, meeting me here and not get them in front of the camera if I haven't interviewed them already? We also got tons of B-roll and tons of snippet interviews for upcoming projects, which I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about. So I'm just going to say you'll see it in upcoming projects. And I was trying to think of a way, especially now that I may have upset people, I was trying to think of a way to integrate some of the clips into subscriber-only content, just as a neat little window into what went on. But, I mean, it wasn't, certainly wasn't an event like an expo thingy that you missed. It really was just a bunch of people in a room with some neat things, that went on in it. And the final thing that you mentioned, I did want to touch on for a second, in that, did the manufacturing and distribution part of the community have a presence? So yes, everybody that was invited couldn't make it, and not everybody that I work with could have been invited just because of space constraints. But that's something that I'm always digging deep into, and I'm always trying to put people together in that and to help people that have a problem with, or not necessarily a problem, but people that could have their manufacturing streamlined. They could benefit from that. I'm trying to put in touch with other people. And, so sometimes they work well with one person and not another or whatever else. But overall, yes, I'm always working on that. And some of those people were there. And, I'm going to continue to do all that. So I guess I've almost gone 10 minutes now just trying to explain this. So the short version is Retro Create this year was just a meetup in an empty room type of thing. If we could afford to do it another year, it'd be at least one full day open to the public and everybody's invited. If anybody was offended by that for any reason, I can't apologize enough. There were a few people I forgot to invite, and there were a few people I didn't invite because they're not currently working on projects with me. So, I'm really sorry if that upsets people. I'm really sorry if I felt like I snubbed people, but please just let actions speak louder than words and go back through my Twitter feed and see that I invite everybody everywhere. So this is the one time I didn't invite everybody on the planet to join me with something. So, and maybe think about that as well. If you were one of those people that replied, yes, I'll be there 100 times and never showed up, maybe you shouldn't be one of the ones complaining. Kind of a dick thing to say, I realize that, but, put yourself in my position. But on the other side, if you are one of those people that always shows up and helps people in the community and you weren't invited to this, I'm so sorry. It was never meant to snub you or anything like that. It was just meant to solve a problem and get other stuff done. But if anybody has any more questions about this, feel free to ask. Privately or publicly, I don't, whatever. I want to make sure that people know that this wasn't like the trolls make it out to be. Because don't forget, once you get past 100 followers, at least one is somebody out there whose game is to try to destroy you, because that's what makes their weird brain happy. Which, you know what? That's fine, because those people pre-internet were probably serial killers making skin suits. So I'd rather take one for the team than have somebody get physically hurt. But don't get sucked into the trolling, and the number one word you could always see that it's a troll is if somebody says the word elitist. This was an elitist meetup for Bob to try to snub the members of the community that aren't in his group, like that. As soon as you see that, that's how you know it's a troll. Because anybody that's ever known me for more than a second, even if you've watched more than one of these Q&As, everybody's invited to the party. Whether you use composite video, whether you stretch your old consoles to 16:9, there is no elitist involving with me. I'm just a fat guy with a microphone. So please just remember that there are trolls out there, and don't get sucked in. Next up, and on a much lighter note, Monty Green asked, regarding the analog DAC, do you know if it's possible to connect multiple analog consoles through an HDMI switch into it? Or do you have to swap consoles manually? Or perhaps they expect you to buy one DAC per console because that would be the premium thing to do. No. So I doubt they expect people to buy more than one. My guess, and this is a guess, I haven't tried it yet, but my guess would be that if you were going to use an HDMI switch, you would have to switch to the console first, then turn on the console, and then let that handshake happen. But I doubt it. I think the only way that you could pull that off is if it was a manual switch, one of those push button ones, and they usually are only 2-to-1, and those are the ones that basically just move the pins between the two connections. That would probably work, but once again, you would have to switch to the console you were about to use before powering it on, because it does a handshake between the two. I don't think the USB does any kind of data handshake, but that's once again just a guess. But generally speaking, maybe we'll all be pleasantly surprised and we could put it through a matrix switch so that some days you could just output HDMI to your TV and other days you could output analog to the DAC. But for now, I would just keep your expectations in check and assume that you need to manually plug it into each of the consoles. Also, have you tried using the HDMI splitter to get analog and digital simultaneously? I have not. That's a pretty interesting idea. The splitter might not work at all because the splitter might not recognize the signal coming out, and I don't know even what signal is going to the DAC. I don't think it's just a 240p signal. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made a DAC. They would have just sold just a very basic HDMI to VGA converter or something, or told you to buy one off of Amazon. So I would assume that would not work, because I would assume that it's not a standard 240p HDMI signal. And lastly, curious if these HDMI devices between console and DAC cause any issues, considering connecting the console and DAC apparently causes the console to switch into a special DAC mode. So yeah, exactly. So Monty, what I could only tell you is keep your expectations at you're going to need to only plug in the DAC one at a time manually to each console. And then in the future, maybe we'll get lucky and find a cheap matrix switch that would allow you to have a couple of analog consoles plugged in, one going to a flat screen or capture card or something, and the other one going to the DAC. But I don't know that would ever work for all of those reasons. And even if it did, there's a whole bunch of other problems that could go with it. So sorry, my answer isn't a good one, but I'm pretty sure I'm right on this stuff. Jens Jacob Christensen said that he's trying to get the picture from an RGB modded N64 to display on two screens using an Extron DA2 RGB HV. I'm assuming it's just an Extron device with one input, two outputs. He's using an official Nintendo RGB Scart cable to a Scart switch, and then a Retro Gaming Cable's Scart to BNC to that from the switch to the Extron. All the other components are working individually, but when he brings the Extron into the mix, he gets a black and white or distorted picture. And have tested this setup with a SNES, and it does the same thing. Any idea what's going wrong? So there's two issues. First of all, I believe the Extron devices require TTL sync. So if you're going through a SCART switch like the G-SCART, flip on the sync stripper, that should be good enough. Or, if not, you might have, this is one of the few times that using a sync stripper would actually be a big help, simply because it would output the higher voltage that the Extron is expecting. Also, if you're using an official Nintendo RGB SCART cable, it's probably sending composite video down the sync line. Yet another reason that you would need a sync stripper, because if I remember correctly, it's been a while, it's been over a year, actually it's been 2 years since I've really messed hard with Extron devices. I believe it had to be C-Sync and it had to be TTL level voltage. And the last part of the equation is I can't remember what an Extron DA2 is. So another example would be the Extron 203 or 201 RXI boxes, which essentially you could have one in and two out for some of those, or the Extron crosspoint switches. And for both of those scenarios, you're going to need, at the very least, C-Sync, not composite video as sync, and possibly even a sync stripper to get it up to voltage. So I would go back and check all of that stuff. And also just remember that your Extron outputs TTL level sync as well. So if you're going to a SCART TV, for example, the output of that Extron needs to have the right resistance on it to bring the voltage down. Otherwise, you could blow out your TV, switch, or capture card. So kind of a complicated thing to get into, but hopefully I pointed you in the right direction, and maybe come back next week if I need to clarify anything. Frank Aguayo asked if I have any recommendations for high-quality, good shielded audio cables. So if you're talking about like speaker cable, I just get the really thick stuff that you find online. I don't use the shielded stuff. I use the stuff that's side by side. I'm trying to see if I have any of it in front of me to hold up, but I don't really get any hum on it or anything like that, and it seems to be what a lot of people I know use. I'm sure you could find a way to shield it as well, but I never really went that crazy with it. If you're talking about just audio cables for your consoles, like things that have left and right audio outputs on them, when possible, use the HD Retrovision cables, because the generic RCA on each end cables are priced very fairly, and they're shielded properly, so you don't have any worries on that. And other than that, the only thing I've done in the past, which I kind of hate doing this, but I'll buy cables from Amazon, cut the ends off, open it up, and see if it's actually shielded or not. Now, don't get me wrong, I hate wasting anything, so very often if I need 3 feet, I'll buy a 6-foot, cut it in half, and that way I could, if it's good cable, I could still use it. I could strip the ends and put different connectors on them. And if it's terrible cable, I'll throw it out or I'll put it in a bad cable box because it's not really a good thing to use. The other thing is, does any system have balanced audio outputs? I know it's an industry standard in pro audio and hi-fi. I just don't know if it's trickled down to humble video game systems. I have no clue. I'm very sorry. If anybody knows the answer to that, let me know. But just the only thing I will point out, and I've mentioned this in a lot of the talks that I've given at the expos, and we'll touch upon it in an upcoming video, but these consoles were consumer-grade devices made with consumer-grade parts. And that's one of the many reasons why when you do recaps and you do things like an RGB bypass, you can get such a noticeable difference. Because, like, for example, when Nintendo made the last revisions of the Super Nintendo, if they were to use, like, 1% tolerance resistors and 5% tolerance capacitors, it would just be a complete waste of money. The average person using that wouldn't have known the difference or been able to tell the difference. It would have been a waste that jacked the price of the console up. Whereas now, your average person modding one of these things, if you end up dropping $50 on an RGB bypass kit, the best capacitors on the planet, and some other toys for it, it's really not a big deal, and we get the extra the benefit from it because we're using it. So my guess would be no, and my guess would be any kind of analysis you did on these consoles would point to the mid to low end of consumer grade electronics. But luckily, we have things like the ability to do complete cap replacements and to replace the video output section with stuff that has video file grade stuff in it. And you could, with the triple bypass, now you have an audio file sound circuit on there that's a significant upgrade, in my opinion, on many of these consoles. So my guess would be keep your hopes low for what they came with from the factory, but look into all of the community built stuff that you could do to it that would enhance it. Paul Pastor had a good one. Does the specific revision of SNES have any bearing as to OSSC or display compatibility, like the SVHCs versus the one chips? I think the answer to that is no. The compatibility will be the same regardless of what model. Now, for sure, if there's some kind of video problem on there, like your capacitors are going and the composite sync isn't working right, yeah, I mean that might be a factor. But if you're talking about all the consoles are in the same exact condition, I think they're all going to have the same exact compatibility. But if anybody's found anything different, please let me know. I'd certainly like to know. But keep in mind, if it's just a one-off, like if my SHVC isn't working or is more compatible or less compatible, it's probably a fluke. Whereas if you said, hey, I've tested 5 SHVCs and these are more compatible than the others, that's data that I'd like to really research on. So I'm pretty sure the answer is a hard no, but I'm always looking forward to being proven wrong. Adam W. asked, regarding the newly announced GameCube optical drive emulator, do you know whether it will allow any region backups to be played on any region console? I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, but it hasn't been explicitly stated. I haven't asked either, but 99.9 it's got to be yes, because you could do that right now with just Swiss and an SD loader. So the answer could be you need Swiss to do it, but it's my very strong opinion that we should all be using Swiss no matter what. Even if you have an unmodded console, there's just so many things that you need that Swiss allows you to do. So if you have an unmodded console and all original games, at least try once in your life, even through emulation if you have to, try Swiss to see if it adds anything that you would benefit from, because I guarantee almost every single power user for a GameCube, somebody that would listen to this Q&A, is going to find at least one scenario in which Swiss is a giant help. So my strong guess on this one is that as long as you're using Swiss, absolutely doesn't matter. Feel free to use any region game on any region GameCube. Jake Lancaster said, outside of software emulation, I don't believe I've heard of any mention of variable refresh rate technology in the retro gaming scene. Given that many consoles and arcade machines output video with wacky refresh rates, shouldn't VRR be a little more on the radar? Doesn't it make sense for us to be investing in these current HDMI and FPGA consoles now when HDMI 2.1 and its native support for VRR is right around the corner? So this is debatable. This is something that I would like to argue on the Retro Roundtable at some point, to be honest. But I think a good example of this would be like the de-jitter mods. And these are things that, doing the de-jitter mod you don't lose any video quality whatsoever. The timings aren't changed enough so that even, in my opinion at least, speedrunners wouldn't be affected. But you're still fixing a problem that only exists on digital displays. And to your point, variable refresh rate stuff could fix this. We'd have to test it to find. So, I guess there's two ways of looking at this stuff. You have to think of, if I want to play my console today, what is that going to entail? And then you also need to look at the future of this stuff. So it's my very strong opinion that things like a de-jitter mod that are 100% reversible, if that's what you want to do today to get your console working, do it. And then 5 years from now or 10 years from now, when you got an 8K TV and the latest scaler and you don't need that anymore, hey, if you go to do a recap on your console, maybe reverse it and put the old way back just for preservation. I don't know. But it's just my opinion that as long as whatever you do today doesn't permanently damage the console, then it's all good. And I think the best example of this is people 10 years ago that are like, oh, why buy all these extra cables? Just drill a bunch of holes in your consoles and you could get composite and S-video right there. And those same people now have Swiss cheese for the back of their consoles and they don't even use them because they're using RGB. So it's a great debate. It's one that I would love to talk about with people that are much smarter than I am. But my easy answer to your question is just that. It's a great debate, but as long as whatever you're doing to make your stuff work today isn't permanently damaging, then just I would feel comfortable doing it. Doomleg said they found a Sony Trinitron flat CRT for $20. It supports both PAL and NTSC and has 2 SCART inputs, an S-video input, and a composite input. Other than light guns not working, is it a good buy for retro gaming? So first and foremost, above any of the awesome things that you just mentioned, any CRT is good for retro gaming. I made it very clear in my presentations this year, which hopefully will be a video by the end of this year so I could demonstrate to everybody. But any CRT is good, even if it's just got RF. As long as it works, we could deal with that later. So the fact that you found a cool CRT for $20 is great. However, the fact that it supports both PAL and NTSC and has 2 SCART inputs, which means at least one should probably be RGB compatible, and an S-video and a composite, hell yeah. And as an aside, you said other than light guns not working, try them. I had a flat screen CRT that worked perfect with every game I threw at it, and I've had some that worked only in the middle but not towards the edges and everything in between. So don't count out light guns until you've actually given them a try. But yeah, that seems like an awesome score for $20. But once again, any CRT is a great way to experience classic games. Moon Turtle said they're considering an SVGA monitor cable with 3.5mm stereo from Amazon to improve their Mister setup. Do I know whether the added audio signal risks interfering with the video signal while combined in the same cord? It would be convenient to not have separate audio and video cords running from the I/O board to the Switch. You'll have to try to find out. My personal experience, and I've only tried 5 out of the 1,000 that are out there. My personal experience is every time I use something with the integrated audio cable, both were a piece of crap, both the video and the audio. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's just the cables that I personally have tried. So if they're super cheap and it's a possibility of making your setup more efficient, give it a try. If not, get one of those VGA. I don't think they make VGA to S-video. I think what they actually make is VGA that breaks out a short little pigtail of composite in S-video. But I would get one of those, then use a good shielded S-video cable to go into your TV, and then just get a separate shielded audio cable. but I do understand that efficiency of setups is something that could mean a lot in certain environments. So, if it really is important to you, just give the other one a try. If you're only, and if it sucks, at least you got a spare cable, as long as it's cheap enough. But my gut's telling me that you would really want to get separate in order to get the most shielding and reduce the risk of buzz on the audio lines. Martin Lowe said they were wondering if I had any advice regarding getting started with chip programming. They're interested in making chips such as Sega CD, Saturn, and Dreamcast, multi-BIOS, game EEPROMs, PlayStation mod chips, and etc. Is there such a good thing as a good starter kit for beginners? So I'm going to start by saying I probably am not a good person to ask because I'm not an expert in this, but I hopefully can point you in the right direction as to where to get your answer. A lot of my friends do exactly what you're saying. You could get cheap EEPROM burners. Reasonably priced ones, pretty good out there on Amazon and eBay and stuff like that. So my only suggestion as a very much layman in this would be to find your first project that has something where you could just plug the chip into the EEPROM reader and then plug the chip back into whatever it is that you're doing. So you don't need to solder each pin directly in order to do it. Have something that's slot compatible. And that definitely does exist out there, but I would start with those, and I would start with stuff. If you're interested in making your own games, I would start with possibly picking up one of those kits and the Genesis Scart kits from Crix, I believe. Grab a programmer and flash your own ROM onto that Genesis cart. Even if you just use it to practice, now you could flash it with the 240p test suite and have yourself a pretty darn handy test cartridge as well. So I would just start with products that are plug and play, if you will, that only involve installing and removing the chip from the device and not ones where you need adapters and things like that. So hopefully that'll point you in the right direction. But once again, I'm not even close to an expert in this. I'd barely even call myself intermediate. So hopefully I'd at least point you in the right direction. So if you find out my advice is shit, at least you'll be able to find the good advice after. Jason D had a question, and very respectfully, I have to answer it quickly and not in detail. And address me offline if you really want to know why. But Jason wants to know, where did the chips in the RetroTink come from? Are they commercial video chips that happen to handle 240p, or are they custom? There are chips that are available. Every part on the RetroTink you could order by itself online. There are no custom chips. The way the chips are arranged, and the way the circuit's built, and the software that's running on them is what makes them custom. And that's where I have to end it at. If you'd like to know more about it, feel free to check out pictures online. Mike never hides his designs. In fact, he's proud of them. So he doesn't do shady things like scrape off the chip information or put silicone on it to hide it from people. But at the moment, that's all I could talk about, and you'll all see why pretty soon. And over on Subscribestar, the importer wants to know if I think it would be possible for Mr. Cores to eventually support save states. Technically speaking, it should be possible. There should be no technical reason why, but it's very hard to do. And it's different for each console, and it's different for each mapper sometimes, depending on the console. I know I'm oversimplifying. There's one dev out there who's ready to smack me in the face for jumping to the end like that. But my answer is that it's technically possible, and it's just really hard. And when the devs get to it, I'm sure it's on their list of things to look at. I just don't know when they would get to it. So for me personally, I don't use save states, so it's not something I've been following. But if there's any official release, I'll definitely let everybody know. And if you're friends with any of the Mr. Devs, maybe just pass it along and just say, hey, is this something you're working on? What's the deal with it? But for as far as I know, it's definitely possible. It's just pretty hard, and I'm sure somebody will get to it eventually, at least on one of the systems. Well, that's it for this week. Sorry if the background noise is too crazy. It's been like this all day yesterday, which is why I didn't shoot it last night, and all day today as well. So, I felt like I just had to power through it because otherwise I wouldn't be able to get it done this week. Also, anybody who's new to these Q&As, any question at all that you have, just find the latest Q&A post wherever it is that you support and post your question there. Sometimes I miss a question. Sometimes my answer accidentally gets deleted in Premiere or something like that. So if I miss your question, it's not personal. Please just re-ask it next week, and I'll make sure to get to it. And as always, thank you so much to everybody who supports and participates in these things. I really enjoy doing it, and I can't tell you all how much I always appreciate the support. So thanks very much, and I'll see you next week.